I never wanted to come to Camp Sliver Lake. 2 weeks in the woods, no video games, no TV, just bugs, dirt, and endless outdoor activities. But my parents, they thought it was a brilliant idea. "It'll be good for you, Elliot," they said. "You need to get outside more." I didn't agree. The second I stepped off the bus, I knew this place wasn't for me. The camp looked like every other run-down summer camp I'd seen in movies, rickety cabins, mosquito-filled air, and a lake so dark it looked like a giant puddle of oil. The other kids seemed fine. They were laughing, grabbing their bags, and running to claim bunks in the cabins. But I felt a chill run down my spine the moment I saw that lake. It was too still, like it was waiting for something. The first few days at Camp Sliver Lake were exactly what I expected. Boring. The counselors kept us busy with swimming, canoeing, and hiking, but none of it could distract me from the weird feeling I had about the lake. Something about it didn't sit right with me. It was too quiet. Even when everyone was splashing around, the water barely moved. It was as if the lake wasn't real, just a big, black mirror reflecting the sky. I caught myself staring at it more than once, feeling like something was off. And then, on the third night, the whispers started. It was late. Everyone in the cabin was asleep, and I was staring up at the ceiling, trying to fall asleep, when I heard it. "Elliot?" It was faint, like a breeze slipping through the window. I sat up, listening harder, wondering if I'd imagined it. "Elliot, come closer." The voice was soft, almost like it was calling from far away. My heart started pounding in my chest. I glanced around the cabin. The other guys were snoring, completely out of it, but I couldn't ignore it. I slid out of bed, tiptoeing across the creaky wooden floor toward the cabin door. The air outside was cool, and the camp was eerily silent. My eyes locked on the lake. Its dark surface rippled gently under the moonlight. "Elliot, I'm waiting." The voice was coming from the lake. I don't know what pulled me toward the water that night, but I couldn't stop my feet from moving. The closer I got to the lake, the louder the voice became. It wasn't menacing. If anything, it sounded familiar. But there was something else in that voice, something sad. I reached the shore, my heart pounding. The lake was still as glass, reflecting the full moon above. But then, as I scanned the water, I saw something. No, someone. There was a boy standing at the far end of the lake, half hidden by the shadows of the trees. He looked about my age, maybe a little older. His clothes were dripping wet, and his skin was pale, almost too pale under the moonlight. He wasn't moving, just staring at the water. Who are you?" I called out, my voice shaky. The boy turned his head slowly, and I felt a chill run down my spine. His eyes were dark, but they seemed to shimmer, like the lake itself. "You're new here," he said, his voice soft and distant. "I'm Cole. I used to come to this camp too." I swallowed hard, taking a step back. "Used to?" The boy smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, a long time ago." The next morning, I couldn't stop thinking about Cole. He seemed so out of place. No one else at the camp had mentioned him, and I was sure I'd never seen him during the day. When I asked the other guys in my cabin if they knew about Cole, they just shrugged and gave me weird looks. "You okay, Elliot?" one of them asked. I wasn't sure how to answer, but that night, the whispers came again. "Elliot, don't go near the lake." The voice wasn't Cole's this time. It was quieter, more urgent. It felt like a warning, but it didn't make sense. I'd been near the lake every day since we arrived. What was so dangerous about it? I couldn't sleep after that. I kept hearing whispers through the night, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw the lake and Cole. The next night, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to find Cole. I needed answers. As soon as everyone was asleep, I slipped out of the cabin and made my way to the lake. There he was, standing by the water's edge, just like before. His clothes were still wet, and he looked even paler than the last time I saw him. "Cole," I called, trying to keep my voice steady. "Who are you really? Why do I keep hearing whispers?" He didn't look at me. Instead, he stared out at the water, his expression distant. "They're waiting," he whispered. "They've been waiting a long time." "Who's waiting?" He finally turned to face me. "The ones in the water, the ones who never got out." I backed away from the lake, my heart racing. This was insane. There was no way Cole was telling the truth, right? But then I saw them, dark shapes moving beneath the surface of the water. At first I thought it was just fish, but no. They were bigger than that. Human shapes, slowly rising toward the surface, their pale hands reaching up like they were trying to grab something or someone. "Elliot, you shouldn't have come," Cole whispered, his voice barely audible. "Now they're coming for you too." I stumbled back, my legs shaking. "What do you mean? What do they want?" Cole's eyes met mine, and I saw the fear in them. "They want to pull you under, like they did to me." I didn't wait to hear any more. I turned and ran, the sound of whispers growing louder behind me. The last thing I heard before I reached the cabin was Cole's voice, faint but clear. "I'll see you soon, Elliot." I slammed the cabin door behind me, my breath ragged, heart pounding in my chest. My hands shook as I locked the door, glancing around the dark room. The other kids were still fast asleep, oblivious to the terror just beyond the lake. I felt the weight of Cole's words echoing in my mind. "They want to pull you under, like they did to me." What did that even mean? Cole, was he dead? The thought gnawed at me. But if he was, how was he standing there, talking to me like any other kid at camp? I tried to push the thoughts away, but sleep didn't come easy. Every creak of the cabin, every rustle of the trees outside felt like the whispers coming back for me. By the time morning came, I hadn't slept a wink. At breakfast, I scanned the tables for any sign of Cole. Nothing. No one acted like anything was wrong, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I couldn't tell anyone about what I'd seen. They'd just think I was crazy, and part of me wasn't sure they'd be wrong. The day dragged on with the usual activities, swimming, hiking, crafts. But when we went back to the lake for canoeing, I couldn't bring myself to get in the water. I stayed on the shore, pretending to be interested in skipping stones. Every splash from the others sounded louder, like the lake was trying to drown out the noise with its own secrets. I found myself staring at the water again. The surface was calm, almost too calm, like the glassy stare of someone hiding a terrible truth. My eyes caught movement below the surface, just for a second, and I jumped back, my skin crawling. "Elliot!" a voice called. I flinched, turning sharply, but it wasn't Cole. It was Mark, one of the counselors. "You okay?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "You've been acting weird since you got here." "Yeah, I'm fine," I lied, but my voice was shaky. "I just don't feel like going in today." Mark shrugged. "Suit yourself." The rest of the day passed in a blur. My mind kept returning to Cole, the shapes in the water, the warning. As night fell, I dreaded the return of the whispers. It didn't take long. As soon as the camp went quiet, I heard it. "Elliot." I gritted my teeth, pulling the blanket tighter around me. This time, I wasn't going to answer. But the voice didn't stop. "Elliot, they're coming for you." It was Cole. He sounded farther away, more desperate. "You need to leave, before it's too late." I squeezed my eyes shut, my heart racing. Why was this happening? What had I done to deserve this? Suddenly, there was a soft knock at the door. I shot up in bed, staring at the wooden door, my breath catching in my throat. The knock came again, soft, slow, like someone tapping their fingers. I didn't want to go to the door. Every part of me screamed to stay put. But something pulled me toward it. I slid out of bed, tiptoeing across the floor, careful not to wake the others. My hand hovered over the doorknob. Another knock, barely a whisper. I opened the door. Standing there, drenched in water, was Cole. His pale face was ghostly under the moonlight, and his eyes looked hollow, like they held centuries of sadness. "You need to come with me," he whispered, his voice hoarse. I shook my head, my legs trembling. "No, I can't." "They'll find you if you stay," Cole said, stepping closer. His clothes clung to his skin, water dripping onto the wooden floor. They always do. I backed away, my mind racing. "Who are they?" Cole's face darkened, his expression grim. "The ones who drowned, the ones who were lost to the lake. But why me? Why now?" "You saw them, Elliot. That's all it takes." I felt the blood drain from my face, all because I had seen something in the lake, something I shouldn't have. "They won't stop," Cole continued. "You have to get out of here. Run." I glanced around the cabin, my heart pounding in my ears. Run where? How could I outrun something I didn't even understand? But Cole didn't wait for an answer. He turned, disappearing into the night, leaving only the wet footprints in his wake. I stood frozen in place, every muscle in my body tense. My mind screamed at me to follow him, to get as far away from this place as possible, but something held me back. The whispers had stopped, for now. The day had come, another mandatory activity on the lake. I stood at the shore, my stomach in knots, staring at the canoes and rafts bobbing gently on the surface. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to make up an excuse and stay out of the water. But today, the counselors weren't having it. "Come on, Elliot," Mark urged, pushing a paddle into my hand. "You haven't been on the water all week. Time to face your fears, buddy." I wanted to tell him everything. The whispers, Cole, the dark shapes I'd seen moving beneath the surface. But how could I explain something so unbelievable? Reluctantly, I climbed into one of the rafts, settling at the back while the other campers laughed and splashed around. They were oblivious to the weight pressing down on my chest, the cold sweat that clung to my skin. As we pushed off from the shore, the water beneath us seemed to darken, the calm surface rippling as if something massive was moving just below. I gripped the sides of the raft, my knuckles white. I couldn't shake the feeling that the lake was watching me, waiting. The laughter of the other campers faded into the background as we paddled out farther. I tried to keep my eyes focused on anything but the water, on the trees, the sky, but it was no use. My gaze kept drifting back to the black depths beneath us, searching for movement, for the shapes I knew were lurking down there. Suddenly, a scream pierced the air. I whipped my head around just in time to see one of the campers, Jake, lose his balance on a nearby raft. He teetered for a moment, arms flailing, before plunging headfirst into the lake with a loud splash. "Jake!" Mark shouted from his canoe. "Stay calm, we're coming." The other counselors sprang into action, paddling furiously toward the spot where Jake had gone under. But something was wrong, he wasn't coming back up. The seconds dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity. The surface of the lake remained eerily still, not a ripple in sight. "Jake!" one of the campers yelled, panic rising in their voice. Without thinking, I leaned over the edge of the raft, scanning the water. And then I saw it. Jake's hand, breaking the surface, but something was pulling him down. His fingers clawed at the air, desperate, but his body was sinking, disappearing into the murky depths. "Help! He's stuck!" I screamed, my voice breaking. Mark dove into the water without hesitation, swimming toward Jake with powerful strokes. He grabbed hold of the boy's arm, but something beneath the water seemed to be fighting him, pulling Jake down with a force that defied explanation. I could see the panic in Mark's eyes as he struggled to pull Jake free. For a moment, it looked like they might both be dragged under. But then, with one final burst of strength, Mark yanked Jake to the surface. Another counselor helped pull Jake onto their raft, and the boy gasped for air, his face pale, his eyes wide with terror. "Get him to shore!" Mark shouted, swimming back toward the rafts. We paddled as fast as we could, the adrenaline pumping through our veins. Jake was coughing, sputtering, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. But he was alive. As we reached the shore, one of the counselors called for an ambulance. Jake lay on the sand, shaking, his face drained of color. The rest of the campers huddled together, whispering in hushed voices. "What happened out there?" one of them asked, but no one had an answer. I stood frozen, my mind spinning. I knew what had happened. Something had tried to pull Jake under, just like Cole had warned me. As the paramedics arrived, I watched them load Jake onto a stretcher, his breath still shallow but steady. Relief washed over me. He was going to be okay. But that relief was short-lived, because that's when I saw him. Standing at the edge of the trees, half hidden in the shadows, was Cole. His dripping wet clothes clung to his pale skin, and his dark eyes stared directly at me. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. He didn't speak this time. He didn't need to. His gaze said everything. This isn't over. I backed away from the lake, my heart hammering in my chest. The paramedics drove away, the other campers returned to their activities, and the counselors tried to pretend everything was fine. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Cole was still out there, and whatever was lurking in the lake was still waiting. As I turned to leave, I heard it again, faint but unmistakable. "I'll see you soon, Elliot." The atmosphere at Camp Sliver Lake had changed. The incident with Jake left everyone uneasy, even if most of the campers tried to shrug it off as a freak accident. But I knew better. The lake was dangerous, and Cole had warned me about it, warned me about them. And yet, the counselors kept acting like everything was fine. 2 days passed without any other strange occurrences, and I started to feel a little more at ease, even if I still avoided the lake. But then, something happened that made the first incident with Jake seem like nothing. It was after dinner, just before lights out. The counselors had organized a bonfire by the lake to try and lift the campers' spirits, complete with s'mores and ghost stories. The sun was setting, casting a dim, orange glow over the water. I could barely listen to the jokes and stories. My eyes kept drifting back to the lake, now a flat black sheet under the fading light. As we gathered around the fire, I overheard two of the counselors talking quietly, their voices laced with concern. "I can't believe they're making us take the kids back on the water tomorrow," one of them said. "After what happened to Jake, it's risky." The other counselor nodded grimly. "Yeah, but they don't want to scare the parents. We'll just keep it short." I shifted uncomfortably, staring into the flames. I hadn't told anyone about Cole, about his warnings, and after what happened with Jake, I couldn't shake the feeling that something worse was coming. As if on cue, a shrill scream tore through the air. Everyone jumped, heads turning toward the sound. It was coming from the lake. I squinted through the darkness. A figure was thrashing in the water, their arms flailing wildly. "Help! Help!" the voice screamed, high-pitched and desperate. One of the campers, Megan, had somehow ended up in the water. Her eyes were wide with terror, her head barely above the surface as she struggled to stay afloat. "How did she get in there?" someone shouted, panic spreading through the group. The counselors rushed toward the shore, but something was horribly wrong. Megan wasn't just struggling to swim, she was being dragged under. Her arms clawed at the water, her face twisted in fear as she kicked frantically, trying to break free from whatever had hold of her beneath the surface. "Megan!" Mark yelled, diving into the lake. He swam with powerful strokes, but just like with Jake, the water seemed to fight him, like invisible hands were pulling Megan down. I stood frozen, watching in horror as Megan's head slipped beneath the surface, her scream cutting off abruptly. For a second, everything was deathly silent. The lake was still, eerily calm under the moonlight. Then Mark surfaced, gasping for breath. He dragged Megan up with him, her limp body barely moving as he struggled to swim back to shore. I felt a rush of cold dread wash over me. Just like before, something in the lake had tried to pull her under. But this time, I saw them. Dark shapes, just beneath the surface, barely visible in the moonlit water. Human shapes, their pale hands reaching, their faces twisted in agony as they floated just beneath the waves. They were watching us, waiting. Megan was pulled to shore, coughing and sputtering, but alive. The counselors huddled around her, checking to make sure she was okay, but none of them seemed to see what I had seen. I turned back toward the lake, my heart racing, and there he was, standing on the shore, just beyond the trees. Cole. He stared at me, his dark eyes glinting in the moonlight, his wet clothes clinging to his pale body. I could feel his presence, like a cold weight pressing down on my chest. He wasn't alone. The others, the ones in the water, were with him. I swallowed hard, unable to tear my gaze away. "I'll see you soon, Elliot." The next morning, Megan was taken to the camp nurse, and an ambulance was called, just like with Jake. The camp was in chaos. The counselors tried to keep things under control, but the campers were scared, and rumors started to spread like wildfire. Some said the lake was cursed. Others whispered about the shadows beneath the water, the pale hands that had tried to drag Megan under. I knew the truth. Cole had told me, warned me, but now it felt like everything was spiraling out of control. Camp was set to end the next day, and the counselors had canceled all lake activities. I should have felt relieved, but the unease in my gut only grew worse. Something was going to happen, I could feel it, and it was coming for me. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The air was heavy, thick with an unnatural silence that pressed against my ears. I knew it wasn't over. And then, just as I expected, I heard it. "Elliot." The whisper floated through the air, soft and distant, like a breeze slipping through the cracks in the window. But this time, it was stronger, more urgent. "Elliot, you have to leave." I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. The room was dark, the other campers fast asleep, but I knew where the voice was coming from. The lake. I slipped out of bed, my body moving before my mind could catch up. I crept through the cabin and out the door, the cool night air wrapping around me like a shroud. The camp was eerily quiet, the only sound the faint rustle of the trees in the distance. I made my way down the path toward the lake, my footsteps slow, cautious. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a pale glow over the water, and there, standing at the shore, was Cole. He looked even more ghostly than before, his skin almost translucent under the moonlight. His clothes were soaked, water dripping from his hair, but he didn't move. He just watched me with those dark, hollow eyes. "You need to leave," he whispered, his voice barely audible, "before they take you." "Who?" I asked, my throat dry. "Who's going to take me?" "The ones in the water. They've been waiting, and they won't stop." I took a step back, my mind racing. Why me? What do they want? They want you because you've seen them. They want to pull you under just like they did to me. My breath caught in my throat. You were pulled under?" Cole nodded, his eyes glistening with something that looked like sadness. "I wasn't the first, and I won't be the last. You have to leave before it's too late." "But how? Where do I go?" Cole's gaze shifted to the trees behind me, his expression distant. Run now, before they come." I glanced back at the lake. The dark shapes were there again, just beneath the surface, their hands reaching up, desperate to grab hold of something, or someone. I didn't need to be told twice. I turned and ran, my feet pounding against the dirt path as I raced back toward the cabin. The whispers grew louder, chasing after me, their voices merging into one. Elliot, come back." I ran faster, my heart slamming against my chest. The trees blurred past me, the camp fading into the background. All I could think about was getting away, getting out of there before it was too late. By the time I reached the cabin, my legs were shaking, my breath ragged. I slammed the door behind me, locking it tight. The whispers faded, leaving only silence. But I knew the truth. Cole had saved me that night, but I couldn't stay at Camp Sliver Lake, not with them still waiting in the water. And as I lay in bed, trembling, I heard one final whisper, "I'll see you soon, Elliot." The next morning, the sun rose, casting a soft golden light over Camp Sliver Lake, but it did little to warm the cold knot in my stomach. The camp was buzzing with activity, but there was no laughter, no excitement about going home. Every camper was quiet, their faces pale and drawn. The events of the past few days had left a shadow over us all. The buses lined up at the entrance, engines rumbling as we loaded our bags and prepared to leave. I stood by the lake one last time, feeling its pull, the eerie stillness of the water sending a chill down my spine. The others were already boarding, eager to put the nightmare of Camp Sliver Lake behind them, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to say goodbye. I glanced around the trees, half expecting to see Cole standing in the shadows like always, his pale figure watching me from a distance. But he wasn't there, not yet. Mark, the counselor who had saved Jake and Megan, walked up to me, his face tired, but kind. "You ready to go, Elliot?" he asked, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You've had a rough time here." I nodded, though I felt anything but ready. "Yeah, I'm ready." But as I turned toward the bus, I heard it again. That voice, a faint whisper, carried on the breeze. "Elliot." I froze. I knew what I had to do. "I'll catch up," I told Mark, my voice shaky. "Just give me a second." He looked concerned but nodded. "Okay, but don't take too long. Bus leaves in 5. As Mark walked away, I turned back to the lake. My breath caught in my throat when I saw him, Cole, standing at the far end of the shore, where the trees met the water. His figure was clearer now, more real than I had ever seen him. His wet clothes clung to his thin frame, but his face, there was something different about it. He didn't look sad anymore. He looked peaceful. I stepped closer, the whispers around me fading into silence as Cole raised his hand, waving softly. "Goodbye, Elliot," he said, his voice no longer a distant echo, but clear and steady. I didn't know what to say. For so long he had warned me, watched over me, protected me from the things lurking beneath the water. But now it felt like he was letting go. "Will I ever see you again?" I asked. Cole smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "Not here. You're safe now. But they'll always be there, waiting." I swallowed hard, a lump forming in my throat. I wanted to say more, to ask him about what had happened to him, why he was trapped here, but I knew it didn't matter. His time at Camp Sliver Lake was over, and so was mine. As I backed away, heading toward the bus, Cole faded into the shadows, his figure becoming one with the trees. The lake behind him remained still, its dark surface betraying no sign of the horrors beneath. The bus horn honked, pulling me out of my thoughts. I turned and hurried toward it, my legs heavy, but my heart lighter than it had been in days. I boarded the bus and took a seat by the window. As we pulled away from Camp Sliver Lake, I looked back one last time. The cabins grew smaller, the trees swaying in the breeze, and the lake, dark and still, stretched out like a black mirror reflecting the sky. And there, on the shore, I saw him one last time, Cole, watching. He stood at the edge of the water, his figure barely visible now, but I knew it was him. He watched as the bus rolled away, as we left Camp Sliver Lake behind. And then, just before the camp disappeared from view, he waved. The bus turned a corner, and the camp vanished, swallowed by the trees. The whispers were gone, the lake far behind us. But I knew that I would never forget Camp Sliver Lake, and I would never forget Cole. As we drove down the winding road, leaving the horrors of that place behind, I felt a strange sense of closure. It was over, I was free. But deep down, I knew that somewhere, hidden beneath the dark waters of the lake, the whispers still waited. For someone else, for another summer. But not for me, not anymore.